talk. Really, really means the world to me that you're here checking out this conversation. So thank you so much for joining me. I pray that this conversation blesses you or challenges you in some way. And if you get anything out of it, if you would consider supporting this podcast by simply subscribing on one of the podcast platforms, wherever it's convenient for you, or leaving a review is super helpful as well. Liking the Facebook page, all that kind of stuff really, truly goes a long way to help. So thank you so much for your consideration there. My guest for this episode is Dr. Janelle Royster, and this is her second time on the podcast. I'm sure it will not be the last time. Dr. Royster is a good friend of mine. She's a licensed mental health counselor in Florida, as well as a licensed professional counselor in Virginia. She has a doctorate in industrial organizational psychology and is currently pursuing another doctorate in traumatology. Dr. Royster is considered a solution-focused trauma therapist, certified in 25 different therapeutic modalities. She sits on the board of directors for Project Vet Relief and as the treasurer for Virginia Clinical Counselors Alliance. The work that Dr. Royster does with veterans, with military, with first responders. She's actually a veteran of the U.S. Air Force herself, but the work that she does in the community is just absolutely incredible, really changing lives. And I'm sure we're going to get into some of that stuff in this conversation, so stay tuned. Just a little bit more. She is currently completing a book called Change Your Language, Change Your Life. Love that title. She works with a myriad of nonprofit organizations to help those who put on a uniform to serve a higher purpose than themselves. And she owns a private practice called Semper Motus LLC. So thank you guys again for joining me. And now please join me in welcoming Dr. Janelle Royster to the podcast.
Yes.
How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm so good. Thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for doing this. It's always such a privilege and an honor and just a pleasure to chat with you. And I always just feel like I'm like jumping into some deep waters when I'm talking to you and talking about stuff that's so far above my pay grade, but it's so fun. And I'm so just blessed to know you, Dr. Royster. So thank you.
Well, you're very sweet. I'm honored and blessed to be here, and I'm very happy that you asked me. But I don't know what we're talking about today. So
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Well, first of all, I mean, I have a couple of things in mind. I was reflecting back on our last conversation when you were on with the rock star himself, Dr. Joseph Capps, and
yeah,
we talked about a bunch of stuff, just dealing in the world of mental health and trauma and counseling and all that kind of stuff. And a couple of things came up that I didn't get a chance to ask you last time that I was thinking about, but first of all, you guys obviously survived the hurricane. Did you have any issues, problems, challenges in your area where you were?
just some of the fences came down. We didn't lose power or anything like that. So that was we're pretty lucky. Fort
Yeah,
Myers got hit pretty hard. We got a lot of people
yeah,
down there that were struggling, but yeah, there's a couple people that have businesses down there and they've asked people to reach out. So I'm kind of waiting on that, kind of keeping my schedule a little open in case they need me.
Mm. And Fort Myers is just what, a couple of hours south of you,
Correct. About
pretty
4.
much.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. I
Yeah,
thought it was
I'm by
closer
the
than that.
Orlando area.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, nothing happens over here. Knock
Oh,
on
I
wood.
thought you were more in the Tampa Bay area.
I work in a traumatic brain injury clinic there a
Hmm.
couple days a week. So I travel a lot. So I go to Virginia. I'm part of their critical incident stress management team. And then I'm part of the critical incident stress management team in Florida as well. And then I do the traumatic brain injury clinic, which is based in Tampa under the undersea oxygen clinic. So he has comprised like
Yeah.
9 doctors, right? Not some are physicians, some are PhDs, some are just experts in their field, but he's created this whole person wellness program to actually cure traumatic brain injuries. So I'm part of that cog, you know. So it's pretty
Yeah.
cool. I do the psychological evaluation. So I meet with whether it's a Green Beret, an NFL player, a ranger. We've worked with regular, I don't want to say regular veterans because they're all important, but
Yeah.
some people that have retired from the military, and we have them do an EEG, which is It's basically like a swimmer's cap, and then it has wires attached to it. And you do 5
Yeah.
minutes of your eyes closed, 5 minutes of your eyes open, and then an hour of just watching some things on the screen. And that way we can read the brain waves and figure out where the deficits are. And that can determine whether or not this person has a traumatic brain injury, what level of traumatic brain injury, right? What percentage. So I know the NFL players traumatic brain injury was like 99.67%. And when we did the final evaluation on him after all the brain training and the ice bath and the massage therapy and the physical therapy and the sleep stuff and the nutrition and the exercise, I mean, it was just amazing. Also,
Wow.
my protocols, I do a lot of cognitive behavioral
Mhm.
therapy and relationship stuff and just kind of navigating what does my life look like after PTSD, after a TBI? How do I start communicating with people in my life? So I do a lot of that kind of therapy. And at the end, his when we did his last EEG, it was 1.67%.
What?
Yeah. So this is an individual who, and the only reason I'm using him as an example is because Dr. Dutori did it on a different podcast, so I know I can get away with it.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
so he wasn't functioning real well, wasn't doing a lot productively. He's a retired NFL player, and now he actually is a head coach for a football team, which is pretty
Mm.
amazing.
Yep.
So he's high functioning. His relationship has never been better with his kids, with his wife, and he's maintaining those habits that he created during the
Mhm.
28-day protocol. And yeah, whole person wellness is definitely the way to go.
Man, this is one of the things that I love so much about who you are, your approach, and what you do is that in everything that we've discussed, you're always seems to me, and I'm going to use a lot of just bad terminology, Dr. R. So just forgive me and correct me where you need to, without reservation. But you're always after healing. You're after wholeness. You're not after some long drawn out program where somebody is consistently um and I'm not saying there might not be ongoing maintenance and stuff like that or check-ins and that kind of thing, but
Mhm.
you're not trying to ultimately create a dependence on a system or something like that, but you're really after the betterment of a person's life and mind and mindset and outlook and relationships, and really just kind of the holistic area of a person's life, the whole of a person's life, and really just after getting that person back to wholeness and back to life where they can then live because they've actually been the problem has been corrected, and that they can continue to move on. Did you say that that's pretty accurate?
Oh, that's very accurate. I call myself a solution focused trauma therapist, and I
Mm.
just wipe out the BS because at the end of the day, there's 7 billion people on the planet. We have to figure
Mhm.
out what works for Duke, what works for Dr. Caps, what works for
Mhm.
Jonathan, what works for Greg, what works for whoever this individual who comes and asks for help. It's like, okay, what resonates with you? Are you the type of person that needs to be seen every week and you need those coping skills reinforced? Because that's okay.
Sure.
So one does not fit all. And the challenge I found when I graduated with my second master's is I couldn't comprehend why an individual who is in a therapeutic modality, what resonated with them in their master's program. Because for me, it was rationally motive behavioral therapy because I had
Mm.
had so much trauma. And my professor, the one who turned me on to REBT, he was a traumatologist. So he recognized my signs and symptoms. So
Mhm.
he was like, this is the best modality for you. He didn't say for everyone. He said for you. And we expanded upon because there were other professors that we had been exposed to, where it's like, oh, I'm Gestalt therapy. I'm reality therapy. I'm solution focused brief therapy. And it's like, that's great. But how much of the community in the license in the state in which you reside are you reaching to help these individuals
Mm.
if you're just
Mhm.
a master of one? Now,
Mhm.
I find There are some people that are the masters of that, like Dr. Albert Ellis, right? He's rationally motive behavioral therapy. And what he did when he was alive is he expanded upon Beck's cognitive behavioral therapy. And he said, well, what about the absolutes? What about the finite language? What about the masturbations? And it basically means that we speak to ourselves and to other people in the context of we have to do this or we'll be a bad person. We must do this or they will think badly of us, right? So it's all about everybody else's perception in these irrational beliefs. And I am actually writing a book called Change Your Language, Change Your Life. And the first sentence in it is, why am I so mean to me?
Yes.
And I had a 2-hour conversation with a colonel last night, and she said, you could totally train on this for weeks. And I'm like, what? I just wrote a sentence, but it's interesting how communication changes our whole life. One sentence from a loved one can determine whether or not we have a bad day. And it's like, why do we put so much value on other people's words? It's because we don't have the foundation in and of ourselves. If somebody called me fat, ugly, stupid, that's their opinion. It's none of my business. So why do I find value in that? Why can that ruin my whole day?
Wow.
Those are some questions I have. I don't know.
No. I know it's so good. I love that. Why am I so mean to me? Because that kind of the way that we internalize things that, as you said, that come our way, people say things, people say something negative to you. Sometimes, it's not even something, it might not even be like a derogatory statement, but we perceive that, oh, what did that person mean by that? And so we have this thing where we internalize things that may or may not even be a real thing. It might not even be based in reality. But I think that we all on some level have that tendency to kind of just play stuff in our mind and just be negative. I think that if we were to, this is something I talk a lot about as a pastor, is like, if you were to evaluate just like legitimately for a day, think about all the times where your thoughts just kind of skew negative, and you were to evaluate that, I think you'd be really surprised at the end of the day. And I think that a lot of people would find, I mean, I know they've done studies on this and different things like that. And something about like, 85% of the thoughts that we think every day are repetitive. And like a very large percentage of those tend to be negative and all this kind of stuff. And I think that it's probably true for, a lot of people, that a lot of our thought processes just kind of go negative. And that self-talk, this is something that I tell people all the time. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I always say the most important conversation you're going to have today is the one you have with yourself.
Absolutely.
Because the way that you talk to yourself, when they're like, hi, Duke, but like, just like that kind of internal dialogue that goes on where we're kind of either reaffirming ourselves or tearing ourselves down internally. And, ultimately it outflows into other things as well. The stuff that goes on the inside of us is going to affect
We
our
call that
day-to-day lives,
projection. So if we're having a bad day, typically we come home from a long day at work and stuff happened and somebody says, well, you didn't take out the trash. That's a statement, but you respond to it in a manner of like that just topped off your cup, right? So the interesting part about developmental psychology, and I don't mean to get into all these different therapeutic modalities, but I'm just sharing what's interesting about neuropathways.
I'm right there with you, Dr.
Neuropathways.
I'm picking up what you're laying down. Yeah.
Sorry. The neuropathways are set in a way that I can give you 10 compliments right now. And in the middle of that, so I can make 11 statements. And the 6th statement could be construed as negative. That's the one you're going to hammer on.
I'm locked on it, right? Yeah.
So that is the way that our brain is set, is we attach a negative emotion to that negative comment. And that's when it becomes a challenge. So from the ages of 4 to 7, we record all of our negative emotions. And from the ages of 7 on, we replay them over and over and over again. So the foundation is set. You'll never be good enough. You suck at that. I was told I was terrible at tennis at the age of 14. Guess who's never played tennis? Not since then, because I have an arm, right? So when
Mhm.
I'd hit that ball, I'd hit the wall every time because I couldn't figure out how to carry the ball and let it bounce where it was supposed to.
Yeah.
And that was just one game, one time, but it was from such an influential person in my adolescence. And I had so much value in their words that I decided that was fact.
Wow.
And that's what we have to distinguish is like someone's opinion is not a factual statement unless there's evidence behind it.
Hmm. You know, I did this thing when I was, in high school where, I got into running track when I was a sophomore. I changed
Mhm.
schools, I started going to the public school in my town, grew up in private schools my whole life, and then started going to the public school, and, they talked me into running track, and I got into it, and my school was fantastic. Our track team was always in nationals and just, so our workouts were really difficult, and, it was weird, because I had this drive where I wanted to do well. I wanted to be, like, running with the top kids. So here's the thing, when I got into it late, because I got in with kids that had been doing it for years and all that kinda stuff, and, but there were 2 groups. There was an A group and a B group. I started in the B group. They kicked me out of the B group literally on the first day of practice. They said, "You're too fast for us. Go in the A group." And so I'm in the A group, but I was like one of the slower ones in the A group. So what I started doing was I would work really, really hard in practice because I wanted to run with the fast kids. So the fast kids, they could kind of slack off and I would be killing myself and just keeping pace with them. So I did that for a little while and I was improving very, very, very well. I was improving quickly. I would run, when I had a chance to run the races that I was good at, I did well. But there was this thing in my mind, Dr. Art, where I kept telling myself, I just had this thought that was like, man, I'm not as good as these kids. I'm so far behind. I'm never going to catch up. That's what I did. So I was working hard when I was there, but I only did it for that 1 year. And then I convinced myself like, oh, I need to get an after school job and all this kind of stuff. And I ended up coming away from it. It wasn't until years later that I reflected back on that. And I was like, you know what? The numbers that I was putting up after like 3 months of being on this team, like if I would have stuck with that, like you know what I mean? Like I feel like I could have
Yeah.
done so much more and I could have, really progressed. But I realized reflecting back on it that that was just something, it wasn't even something that they told me. It was
Right.
just something that for some reason it was in my own head and
Mhm.
I put it there and I played it out and I lived it and it eventually became my reality.
Absolutely. That coulda, woulda, shoulda is part of rationally motivated behavioral therapy too. Because those that infinite should, must, have, need,
Mm,
they're all finite language. And we do that a lot. We do a lot of regret. We do a lot of guilt and shame. We reflect on different things and say, well, if I did this differently, instead of just learning from it, taking that emotion out and going, man, if I
hmm,
would have thought that I could achieve this goal, then I would have been here. Okay, well, now that I'm here, I'm over here. So what can I do to achieve a different goal and bring myself
mm,
even further?
yeah,
So we got limited
yeah.
beliefs and we got a lot of things going on in that story that you just told, right? I
Yeah.
remember being in 6th grade and I remember we had to take and they were breaking up the class into 3 different groups. So you had the remedial, the the average, and then the advanced. And everybody is competitive. They all wanted to be in the advanced. I didn't do so hot in math in 6th grade. Knew my timetables and stuff. I just, didn't understand how you multiply words or formulas and, just didn't make any sense to me. So
Math
I
was
was
always
in the
my
remedial part
worst
of math,
subject.
and
Yeah.
I was bullied and shunned for that,
Wow.
which is, quite interesting, but
Yeah.
I didn't hold on to that. I said, "Well, if math isn't my thing, I'm gonna go over here." And
Mm.
lo and behold, I did.
Love it.
It's probably why
Love
I'm
it.
not I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a PhD, is for the simple fact is math is not my favorite subject. But I will
Mm.
tell you that I did below average in algebra, geometry, I think algebra 2 in high school. I did not do well.
Mhm.
But when I did my associates and my bachelor's, of course, you have to take math courses. And I had a female professor and she taught differently. So I think part of it is learning what your learning style is
Come
instead
on.
of tearing yourself apart because you're not doing what everyone else is doing.
Come on. Yeah, and how important do you think it is for people in general, like for everyone to kind of have an idea of the way that their mind or their brain works, the way that they process things? As you're talking, I'm just thinking about that. Like, if I don't recognize that I have the tendency to do that to myself, to tear myself down, I'll just keep doing it. So
Right.
how do you kind of like become aware of those things, and then how important, overall to your overall happiness or mental, health and stability, how important do you think that that is to kind of recognize the way that your own brain works, the way that you process things?
Well, there's a rap song, and in the middle of it just popped in my head. It's check yourself before you wreck yourself.
All
And I
right.
think
All right.
having somebody in your life that has done the work who can step up and, have
Hmm.
that conversation with you and be like, man,
Yeah.
you really are struggling with your viewpoint on you.
Mm.
So making someone aware of that, I think, is pretty profound. I think also recognizing that you don't have to believe what everybody else believes about you.
Mm. Come on.
It's a
Yeah.
choice.
Hmm.
Everything is a choice. I mean, the only choice you really, I mean, you can even choose not to pay taxes. You get in trouble and there's
For a little while.
consequences,
Yeah.
but the only thing we really don't have a choice in is whether we live or die, because that's out of our control,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
It is not in our timing. And the other thing
Hmm.
is there's a lot of people who pray and they're diligent and they get so frustrated. Why aren't things happening for me? I put all this work in this one area and it's just not going. It's just not picking up. It's just not launching. And it's like, dude, it's in his timing. There's nothing you can do
Mm.
about it.
Come on.
You have to be patient. You have to be diligent because it will come to you when you're ready to receive. I talk about this all the time with my clients because they get so frustrated because they're so impatient. We live in a world of instant gratification, and
Hmm.
then they feel it's immediate rejection. That's not necessarily the case. It's in God's
Right.
timing.
Wow.
It's not about you
Wow.
because the world also has to be ready to receive what you're doing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that ask me, I have 5 clinicians in my private practice, and they ask me, they're like, "Oh, well, we can do this and we can do that." Okay, yes, we can, but what kind of clients are you looking for? Let's get this
Hmm.
targeted audience. Because if you're really not certified in eating disorders, like why would we advertise to them? Or you're not
Hmm.
certified in substance abuse, we're not going to advertise to them. So you have to make everything make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I remember when Jonathan Galui was on the podcast. One of the things that we talked about was that like at the end of the day, it's like what does God say about you? What does the Word of God declare about who you are? What does God think about you? Because He's the one that made you. He's the one that created you. So ultimately, if other people are bullying you, they're tearing you down, they're saying things, they're doing things, even if they're not, but you're perceiving it in a negative way,
Mhm.
and we're feeding off of all that kind of stuff, then what we're going to end up doing is producing negative stuff out of our lives as a result. And so it's like on a very basic level, it's like, okay, well, ultimately, who I am, is not defined or determined by what you say or what you think about me. And as long as I live my life that way, I'm always going to be coming up short to an extent.
Mhm.
It's always going to be kind of like the hamster wheel sort of a thing. But if I can
Absolutely.
live my life recognizing that I am loved, I am accepted, I am significant, I have an identity that's firm and established because of the one that created me, the way that he thinks about me and the way that he, loves me is ultimately, if I can live based on that, then, I can, not that things that people say to me aren't going to hurt in the moment, but I don't have to just like internalize them and then, accept them as my reality.
But the thing is you have to keep in context. Is it about you at all? Is it their issues that they're projecting on you so that they get
Mm.
the attention that they need?
So empathy
Well, yeah,
is.
I mean, you have class clowns and you have people who are loud and
Mhm.
obnoxious, and they just they target one individual who they perceive as maybe less than or not doing what everybody else is doing or doesn't
Yeah.
communicate the way that they do. So they project their stuff on this other person, and this other person thinks that their words have value, and they go
Mhm.
home. I mean, honestly, suicide is the youth's number one cause of death right now.
Yeah.
And that honestly scares the snot out of me,
Yeah.
because what it means is those youth are taking the value of others' opinions above all else. So
Mm.
what kind of foundational things can we put in place? You know, there's some developmental psychologists in Texas who are doing these lovely little studies on elementary school kids, and they're teaching them emotional regulation. Now, how amazing is it going to be when they get into high school? How much bullying will there
Hmm.
be?
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how can we
Mhm.
navigate this so
Yeah.
everyone can have that whole person outlook and is like, well, if someone were to do this to me, how would I feel before
Yeah.
I speak? You know, because the tongue is pretty forceful and it's very harmful,
Yeah.
but it can also be very helpful, and you can change someone's life by saying that you care.
Mhm. Yeah, there was something that I mentioned on a podcast a while back, but uh, it was a interview that not even an interview, just a clip that I saw online, and a question was asked to somebody who's an expert in the field of content creation and stuff like that. They asked the question, how do I protect my 9-year-old daughter online from all the stuff? I think she was referring to everything, the bullying that can happen, just the social pressure, potential predators out there, like all that kind of stuff. Like,
All
how do
the
I protect
new
my
harmful
9-year-old daughter?
information that you get
Yeah,
on Google. I mean, you type in a wrong word
right.
and whoa!
Everything
Right.
comes up, right? And so his response, it was very, very, very simple. And I thought it was just very real, very profound. He just says, you build her self-esteem. And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he's like, "'Cause if she's strong in here, if she's a strong person, then what's gonna happen is now she's still a 9-year-old kid and you gotta, be careful, but, if you're building yourself up and you're developing a strong heart, you're developing, a courageous heart, you're developing a heart that, where you know who you are,
Mhm.
then what happens is you're not going to be so quick to internalize those things that come your way, and you're not going to be so quick to fall into somebody else's trap because like, "Oh, that's not consistent with my value system."
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just thought that that was really huge, especially for kids. And so, yeah, as you said, like if we can teach our kids, which is probably more important today than ever, with again, as you mentioned, all the stuff that they're exposed to from a young age or potentially exposed to,
Well,
if we
especially now
can
that the
help to build them from
cisgender,
that
the
young age. Yeah.
non-binary, all of these different things, and it's like, "Ooh, that sounds really good, but I don't know really what it is."
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
So that I find that very interesting too, because the parents are outraged by the individuals receiving this information, but at the same time, they let their kid play online for 4 hours,
Right.
you know? So that's the
Right.
challenge for me, but I just my thing is I want to intentionally communicate
Hmm.
positively and speak words into existence that make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. From a I don't know, from an expert standpoint, I was gonna say a cognitive behavioral standpoint. I'm not sure if that's even the right terminology or not, but
No, you're
what
it's just a different
yeah,
therapeutic modality because I'm trained in so many. When you put it in the right frame, I can answer it that way.
okay.
Because you got existential, you got gestalt, you got like 100 of them. So
Yeah.
just let me know which one you want me to answer and which way, and I'm good.
Well, I was just gonna, just kind of out of curiosity ask, like, what do you think, um, is kind of a healthy way? I know this is not maybe this is definitely not the area that I thought we were gonna talk about, but like just because we're kind of on the subject, what do you think is sort of a healthy way to navigate, with our kids? I mean, I think adults need it too. But I mean, kind of navigate with our kids, as you said, from the ages of 4 to 7, there's all this what was the terminology that you use? All this
I
developmental stuff
said
where
they
they're learning,
record
they're
all negative
recording.
emotions. So they're
Yeah,
recording, like your child is going to record what you and your wife, your emotions. So if you're
gotcha.
explosively angry a lot, that child is going to
Oh,
retain that. And when there is an
yeah.
event that resembles something that triggered you, it's going to trigger the child.
Mm,
So they mimic, right?
yeah.
And that's how
Huh.
they identify which emotion is which. Because at 4 years old, I can't sit here and go, anger is, sadness is, like they don't get it, right?
Anger is a blocked wish. Yeah.
Well, it's actually fear turned outward, but yes.
Yeah.
So,
I think that was,
from a
yeah.
cognitive behavioral standpoint, I believe that education and awareness is first, but communication is right up there with it. So, how you
Okay.
communicate with the individual, because you don't want to make them a narcissist either. And they throw that term around very loosely. So
Uh-huh.
everyone, and I can honestly say this, everyone has narcissistic tendencies. They
Okay.
can be. It doesn't mean they
Mhm.
have them, doesn't mean they embody them. I've had to correct myself on this a couple times because tendencies are possibilities, right?
Mm,
I could
gotcha.
be narcissistic in this venue. I could be narcissistic this way. But the personality disorder is a whole different beast.
Hmm. Okay.
So
Gotcha.
that's personality disorders. They're very similar and they all have about 3 symptoms or behavioral patterns or traits, personality traits that are along the same. So histrionic, bipolar, antisocial, narcissistic. I mean, you can name them all off. And
Mhm.
3 out of the 9 criteria could be met just because they all fit. But then you have to do that deep dive and really figure out how dysfunctional they are with regard to that personality disorder. So people are like, "Oh, I'm in a relationship with a narcissist." Are you?
Mm. Right.
So I
Right.
dive deep and I'm like, "Okay, where were you before any of this happened?" Because typically there was a traumatic event or a serious dysfunction that occurred to separate that union.
Okay.
So you got to pull out the ingrown hair and find out what the source is.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, man. The reason I said I just kind of blurted out the word empathy earlier is that I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I feel like it's one of the things that can kind of see what you think about this, like help us kind of process things that so like when somebody else comes at you, with something, and maybe they're accusing you of something, or maybe they're, just being over, maybe they are just being, a jerk, maybe they're tearing you down, maybe they're bullying, maybe they're, doing something like that.
Right.
Just for me, to kind of have the mindset where I'm kind of thinking like, okay, if this person is coming at me like this, there's a good chance that this person has some messed up stuff going on in their life, and this isn't even really about me at all. And it's a
Right.
good chance that it's just, they're lacking something, they're missing something. Maybe they've got, some kind of, they've had some traumatic experiences, they've had some challenges, they've had some things like that. And so to kind of like, I don't remember to do it all the time, but I think that it's when you do remember that, I feel like that's a helpful thing to just be like, hold on, this stuff that this person's throwing at me, it's probably coming from uh it's probably coming from a place of hurt or a place of pain or
Right.
or something like that, where it's not even necessarily about me. And so why should I internalize this and accept it like that?
So sympathy and empathy are thrown around a lot, but you're talking about perspective. So you're
Mm,
basically gaining sympathy basically involves understanding from your own perspective.
okay.
So I feel sympathy because, if a friend called me and is like, my dad passed away, I'd be like, oh, I have sympathy for you because that's my perspective is that my dad died during COVID, you know? So I can sympathize, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
empathy involves putting yourself in the other person's shoes and understanding why they may have these particular feelings. So that's
Mm,
what you're talking about.
yeah.
You are talking about your perspective, but you're not emotionally attached. So you have
Mm.
empathy for the person because you're stepping in. And that's the challenge with anybody in the psychology profession, is because it's very challenging for us to get angry with people because we know why they do what they do. Right? So it's harder for
Right.
us, and we probably stay in relationships way too long because we have empathy for that other individual because we understand the
Wow.
psychology
Yeah.
behind their behaviors. And so we kind of draw things out a little bit more than we should, or we get into relationships we shouldn't be in.
Wow. Never thought about that. So you give them the benefit of the doubt, and then
Always.
you maybe take on things that you shouldn't because you're understanding their perspective maybe a little bit too much.
A little bit too much, yes.
That's
Yeah, and I mean
yeah.
that works for people. I was in community mental health, and I was a clinical supervisor, and I was in an office that was just extremely toxic, and I
Mm.
stayed for too long because I continued to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'm like, well, she's adjusting because she was in this position before, and now she's kind of got demoted, and she's now in this position, and she has to
Mm.
overcompensate. And I kind of gave her so much grace that it cost me.
Gotcha.
Little
Yeah.
pieces of me were being chipped away throughout that work situation. So
Mm.
I decided that I was not going to, I set boundaries. I decided I was not going to do that again. The next community mental health position I obtained was amazing. I worked there for 5 years, absolutely loved it. The owner was an absolute wonderful superstar. He helped me with so much. I had more learning and clinical supervision from him than anyone altogether. And he wasn't
Mm.
even my licensed clinical supervisor. He just owned the company. So he had pretty amazing intel on how to run a business as a licensed professional, because they don't
Mm.
teach us that. They teach us the counseling, they teach us, the reflective listening and the open-ended questions, and they teach us all this other
Yeah.
stuff. They don't teach us anything about how to run a business. So most people, when they get their independent licensure after residency or after internship, because it's different labels in different states, right? So
Mhm.
yeah,
I
LCSW
gotcha.
is great nationwide, but for us licensed mental health counselors, licensed clinical professional counselors, licensed professional counselors, we all have these different labels, but it's the same job. So when we pass that test and we turn in all our hours and we get that independent license, we're like, ooh, I'm going to run my own company. Yeah, nobody teaches us that. So then we
Wow.
have to find other licensed professional counselors who have their own successful private practice, who have different offices in different areas, and that are teaching us this so that we
Mm.
can be successful, because we don't go to business school,
Gotcha,
right?
right. Yeah,
We
yeah.
don't know how to take insurance. We don't know we're supposed to take copay. Nobody told us, you know. So that's the
Mm.
challenge.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I wanna ask you about, something else, kind of related to what we're talking about,
I
but,
didn't do it.
um yeah, you didn't do I heard. I heard you did it. Um worry and anxiety. So
Whew.
from a again, cognitive behavioral or just like just with yeah, from an expert standpoint, in helping, people walk through mental health, challenges and things like that. Like, how do you I'm curious about like how do you see or how do you even define worry?
Well, there's a lovely little meme on Facebook, and it says, "Worry's like a rocking chair. It doesn't go anywhere."
Mm, okay.
Anxiety can
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
escalate. So anxiety is the inability to control a situation. And
Yes. Yes.
what happens in our brain is we have these thoughts, and it reminds me, you remember the Serta commercials with the little sheep just a bouncing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Before
Uh-huh.
you go to sleep.
Yeah.
Those are your thoughts, right?
Right.
And sometimes they have emotions attached to them. Well, with anxiety, when we have a thought in it, you get stuck. And then we go down this
Mm,
lovely little rabbit hole. But if we do little quick things to disconnect, like hold our breath for 3 seconds. But emotions are only 90 seconds long. If you ride the wave and don't go down the rabbit hole and just focus on that one thought, you can let it go. But
Huh.
if you're trying to manipulate a situation or a thought or trying to
Yes.
challenge something
Yeah.
to control it in the manner in which you want it controlled, you have anxiety. And then
Wow.
you create that anxious habit.
Mhm.
So holding your breath, breathing through it. Because I like to tell people who struggle with anxiety and there's this thought that just won't get out of their head. And then they go down this rabbit hole and it causes them all kinds of physical reaction, right? Because the brain is on overdrive. And then there's people that just, they have racing thoughts and they think too fast, too much, right? So if you hold your breath for 3 to 10 seconds, typically your brain will go, oh, I got to breathe. And then you
Right.
continue to do that. So the first day, what I say is the first day you hold your breath after you have these anxious thoughts, you feel like you're holding your breath all day. But your brain
Yeah.
is a brilliant mechanism, right? It's the world's best computer ever invented. So that it learns. When you
Yeah.
wake up the next day and you have more racing thoughts that cause you to have anxiety, because what it does is it triggers that lovely vagus nerve. So then now you're feeling anxiety in your body and your chest gets tight, your stomach turns,
Mm.
all of that. And you're trying to navigate some sort of control and you don't feel like you
Yeah.
have any, which causes more anxiety. So the second day, you hold your breath half the time. And the third day, a third less. And after that, pretty soon, you're not holding your breath anymore because your brain goes, if she thinks this thought, she's going to make me hold my breath. Then I'm not going to have this thought in my frontal lobe, my frontal lobe,
Wow.
right? My
Wow.
consciousness won't be thinking of this thought. So by holding your breath, you're training your brain to not have those habits, to disconnect those habits. And some people don't like to hold their breath because they got COPD, or they have breathing issues,
Right.
whatever. Breathe through it. In 2, 3, out 2, 3. In 2, 3, out 2, 3. 1, it relaxes the mind. 2, it brings your brain into a focus of something that is required. So these thoughts, these racing thoughts and these rabbit holes, they're optional.
Yeah. That's so good. Oh, that's so good. Man, no, because well, first, I think it's funny that I've yeah, anyway. I'm actually, when I asked you for your expert opinion, you started talking about a rocking chair. I was like,
Yeah.
yes, you're helping me out here.
Yeah,
No,
worry
it's
is
so
like a
good.
rocking chair. You just rock all
Yeah.
day. You don't go anywhere. Like, what is the
Just sitting there.
benefit of me worrying about this specific situation?
Right.
Especially in
Yeah.
relationships. This is what I find most often is that women have a tendency to fall in love with potential, and then they're extremely disappointed when this person doesn't reach that potential. Like, who
Right.
are you to put that on them?
Wow.
And I kind of put it back on, them. I mean, men do it too. It's like,
Yeah.
well, I thought she was this and she said she was that, but her actions don't show. So that's
Sure.
a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
I could talk
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
relationships all day.
Yeah, we should do that. We should next time you come back, if we can remember,
Sure.
I'd love to talk about that, like relationships, communication, that kind of thing.
Well, we're
Man.
social. I mean, that is how we live and breathe, right? I mean, I know that there's some introverts out there who's like, I don't need anybody and I people
Right.
all day and then I go home. I'm half and half. So what's interesting to me is when I was in high school, I was like a 98% extrovert.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, I become a licensed mental health counselor and I'm 52% extrovert, 48% introvert. Because
Wow.
when I go to like some of these nonprofit organization functions, like I can't wait to get back to my hotel room. And I love
Wow. Yeah.
everyone that I spend
Yeah.
time with. I mean, don't misunderstand. I love the connection. I love networking. I love all that. But at the end of the day, I have to wind down.
Yeah. Yeah. Just from a practical standpoint, when you were talking about the kind of like the first day when you're trying to essentially retrain the way that you think, right? So when you're getting into, you recognize like, okay, I'm getting anxious, or these thoughts are coming, and I can just kind of sit there, and I can, to use a biblical term, I can meditate
Yeah.
on those negative thoughts, and I can keep replaying this thing. I can replay this scenario over and
So
over
many
again in my
choices.
mind.
Look at that.
Yeah. And it's like
It's
my
empowering to
way.
realize that you're aware. It's very empowering to go, well, this is not where I want to be today. And you start
Yeah.
using those coping skills.
Yeah.
So what was your
Yeah.
question? Sorry.
Well, yeah. So what I was going to ask was, so when you are kind of taking that pause and you're, holding your breath and just letting that time, are you trying to think about something? Like what's going on in your head while you're doing that? Or are you
You
just
hold your
literally trying to
breath.
disconnect from the thought?
Well, have you ever seen the movie For the Love of the Game with Kevin Costner?
I have not. I should
So
have.
it's a pretty good movie. And
Yeah,
it's
I
about
know. It's like a
baseball, of
classic.
course, because it's
Yeah.
Kevin Costner, Field of
Yeah.
Dreams, Bull Durham. Like he's a baseball guy, right? He did some football movies too, but anyway, he's just a good dude. But there is a part on there where he is a pitcher and he's pitching the perfect game, or he's working up toward pitching the perfect game. I don't want to give it away. It's a really good movie. But he, right before, the catcher, he's thrown back and forth, and he gets the ball, and the batter comes up to the plate, and he's about ready to throw, and he leans forward and he says, "Clear the mechanism."
Mm,
And you see the camera like zooms in on the plate, on the pitcher, on the batter and on the catcher, and it zooms in, and he says, "Clear the mechanism," and the whole crowd goes silent.
mm.
And I think that's what happens when we hold our breath, when we become anxious, is because you can't do anything. Your conscious is only 5% of your brain. Everything working back here is 95%.
Yeah.
Moving our
Yeah.
hands, moving our lips, speaking, all of that is our subconscious. So 5% of our brain is what causes us to become overwhelmed. Doesn't really make sense, right?
Wow. Wow.
So when we hold our breath, it's a conscious decision to clear the mechanism.
Mm. Wow.
Now, the thought may come back. You hold your breath again,
Sure.
and you're training your brain. Your
Yeah.
brain is learning a new trick.
And then is that where the subconscious part of the mind will eventually take over, to where once it becomes kind of like learned behavior? Because I think what happens is, if I can learn that behavior of, a thought hits my head and I automatically start to entertain it, and I become worried and I become anxious. So I'm going down that rabbit trail. I'm spinning my wheels. I'm in the rocking chair. I'm not going anywhere. I can think about something all day long. And what I'm really doing is I'm trying to make an effort. You mentioned it being like an out of control, thing. And so I'm kind of making an effort in my mind to try to become in control of something that's ultimately out of my control, right? Like
Correct.
I'm spinning my
You're
wheels
trying to
trying to.
manipulate ways to control a situation that you have no control over, and that's why you can't figure it out, right?
And that's
So
where, if I can throw something just like from a spiritual standpoint in here, it's where, I think that it becomes almost like this. I think it becomes almost like a pride thing,
mhm,
where it's like I'm used to doing this, and for me to actually let go of these worry, anxious thoughts, in a sense, I actually kind of have to die to myself, because I'm giving up control of
yes,
something. And I feel like one of the most intoxicating things there is like the feeling that you're in control. It's like this thing, and even if it's like a sick kind of twisted way of doing it, like it's all that I know how to do in this circumstance because I've learned it. So
mhm.
I'm trying to
Well, it's a
maintain that
habit.
control. Yeah,
It's a habit.
exactly. Mhm.
When you wake up first thing in the morning, you go to the bathroom. Second thing you do is grab a cup of coffee. Third thing you do is, whatever. But we have these rituals, these habits that we've created. And when you have a thought that passes through your mind every single day, and you're trying to manipulate it, navigate it, make it into something that makes sense, that you don't
Mm,
have all the education on, and you're not willing to do the research on, or you can't navigate it because you're expecting someone else in your life to change, and that's what's causing you
Gotcha.
anxiety. So there's
Mhm.
many different avenues you can go, but essentially what the brain does, and to get back to your question, we obtain 2 million megabytes of data per day through their ears, nose, mouth.
2 million.
2 million megabytes of data. That's how awesome our brain
What?
is, right? So 2
Okay.
million megabytes of data come into our brain. And that's why sleep is extremely important, because when you hit rapid
Wow.
eye movement, when you hit REM, even though it could be an hour and a half to 2 hours in your 8 hours of sleep, it processes all that data.
Whoa,
So
okay.
anything you
Okay.
learn during that day, like, like you hear law students, well, I crammed for the test and then I bombed the test. How much sleep did you get? Did you give REM an opportunity to process and file this information in the
Okay.
appropriate areas so that you can pull it up as needed? No.
Wow.
So when you're holding your breath the first day and you feel like you're holding your breath all day long, and then you hit REM, your brain learned. So the second day you only do it half
Oh.
as much. And the third day you only do it a third as much. And then pretty soon you're not holding your breath at all because you let go of all those negative habits.
Whoa. This is unreal what you're telling me. I can't believe I'm just hearing this for the first time. Like, this sounds like something they should teach you. I mean, of course, they always talk about, everyone always talks about you need to get good sleep. Like, I've always heard, you want to, if you're cramming for an exam, you want to stop and you want to make sure you get a good night's sleep. But I've never heard like the scientific explanation behind it, of going through where your mind actually gets into that state and you have to allow time, right? Because REM doesn't typically happen within the first 30 minutes that you fall asleep, right?
Right.
Is there a way to isolate that where you could, like, if you could lock in, I'm going to get REM, could we survive off of 3 hours of sleep if it
Yes.
was
Yeah,
all
but
just
you'll only
there?
hit 30 minutes of REM. So I have what's
Right.
called
Yeah.
an Aura ring. And what it does is it navigates all my goodies. So it's pretty cool. So it's OURA. And
Mhm.
it's a ring that has all kinds of technological advances, and it also has an app, right? So it tells
What?
us what our readiness is, what our sleep is, what our activity is, what we need to do. It gives you little goodies, little nuggets on how to navigate things, like go to sleep between this time and this time. This is your optimal time. And it like studies you and conforms you so that you get the best quality sleep or the most activity. Like, well, you're the most
Wow.
upbeat in the afternoon, so go take your walk then, so it's pretty cool. Technology is amazing.
That's crazy. That's so cool. No,
It's
I
a
mean,
little
this is
ring and it's got a little computer chip in it. It's pretty phenomenal. But
oh,
yes,
that's
you can
amazing.
navigate that. Typically I would say minimum of 4 hours of sleep get you about 30 minutes of REM. But I will tell you that I learned this from a lot of people that are way smarter than I am about it. They've
Mhm.
studied all the how sleep works, and how the brain works and processes things, and neuropsychologists and people that have studied this stuff for years. I'm just kind of sharing information that I've obtained from them. Obviously I've hit REM because I can pull it up, right?
Yeah.
so
Like,
so when
yes.
the thing is a lot of people are like, well, I got to cram for this and I do much better if I procrastinate. And it's like, I appreciate that, but what information will
Mhm.
you retain after you take this test?
Right.
Nothing. It's like, dude, I'm wiped. I'm all done. Well, of course you are.
I was so good at that, at cramming for an
And not.
exam and getting an A. Like, I was so good at that, but then, yeah, it's like, what's the point? Like, what do you remember? Like,
I was a
I
terrible
mean
test taker, and then I realized that I had to figure out how to take the test.
mhm.
So we have two different tests that we take as counselors. One's the National Counseling Exam, and then the other one's the National Clinical Mental Health Counseling Exam. And that one's like the second level, right?
Mhm.
And that one I took quite a few times, and I thought I was just a bad test taker. And then I found a program that teaches you how to take the dang thing, because
Yeah.
it's not A, B, C, or D.
Right.
It's like, how many minutes of this? How many? It's like, what? I don't even know how to
Mhm.
take this thing. So if you study to learn how to take the test, and then you study the material, you do a whole lot better job on the test.
Yeah. Yeah. My
Logic,
biggest
right?
problem in college was, waking up on time to go and take the test.
Oh, I loved my classes in college because
I
it was
actually,
what I wanted to study.
oh yeah,
So that was the
I
challenge for me, having those standardized classes. Like I can honestly tell you that in my 40 some years of life, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but in my 40 some years of life, I have yet to
uh-huh.
use any geometry.
Right. That you
Like
know of.
none. Any algebra, none.
Do you ever play
Nothing.
pool?
Do what?
Do you ever play pool? There's
Um,
some geometry there. Not that you're thinking. No.
I have, yes. I've played pool in my lifetime, but I hit the ball where I think it should go. It
Right.
doesn't.
Not you don't. Yeah,
I
you're
don't
not
calculate
into it
anything. It's
enough
just like
to
boom.
to
Oh,
be
there goes a
using
cue ball.
mathematics. Yeah.
I'm that girl. I told you I have an arm. So, delicate activities are not my favorite. Axe throwing, volleyball, things like that.
Axe throwing
I love axe throwing.
and race car driving, right? I
Right.
wanted to ask you about that before we run out of
Oh,
time. So you used to drive race cars, right?
yes.
So on what? Can I hear a little bit
Oh,
about it?
sure. So I started when I was in the rate. My parents loved it. So my mom and my stepdad kind of connected with some people who owned a nonprofit. Shocking, right? Been in nonprofits my whole life. And my older sisters and I used to sit on a blanket. We used to have our hair in pigtails, and they were different colors. So my mom knew who we were. But we raced sand, we raced mud, we raced
Mm,
obstacle, we raced quarter mile. I raced sprints. So I got really good. But then my parents, I had a sponsor, and my parents got divorced. So at the end of the day, not to quote Cole Trickle, but I lost my ride because
mm,
they really didn't want to
okay.
decide between the mom and the dad, and the funding. It's very expensive to race.
Right.
But I think my favorite vehicle was probably the center seater, which was it was a 1948 fiberglass body, and it had a roll cage, and it was long
Wow.
in the front, big sand tires on the back, and it was a 327 Chevy blown to a 331, and it was alcohol fuel injected. And I drove
Wow.
a Jeep and a pickup truck, like just all kinds of
Wow.
things. There was one time I remember I was 15, and we did this thing called a rodeo. And
Mhm.
my stepdad had a pie plate full of water in his lap, and I had to race blindfolded
What?
in a 1976 7-inch lift kit pickup truck. It was a short bed, step side, like it was a hot mess of a truck. And I had to race it backwards through an obstacle course and have the most water in the pie plate. So
What?
his strategy, right? He's like, your way is left, my way is right. So when I say my way, you turn the wheel to the right. When I say your way, you turn your wheel to the left.
Yeah.
So I won. He had this much water left. But
The other guy had
everybody
nothing.
else, they get out and their pants were soaked, and it was great. I met
Wow.
the Oak Ridge Boys. I met
Oh, that's crazy.
just so many different Alabama, like um, the guy who sings Turn the Page, Bob Seger. I met so many people because this nonprofit would bring in these bands, and it was pretty cool.
That's
Yeah,
so
it was a
cool.
good part of my childhood.
So you were legit then.
Yeah,
So,
I could
because
have been
that
Danica Patrick. I'd have kicked her butt.
come on,
I'll
up
kick
there
her
on the
right now if
podium.
she gives me a car.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a hard thing to get, right? When you're going in reverse and then, turning the right way, so that's
Yeah,
yeah,
he had a whole
it's a good tip.
strategy. He was pretty good dude. But yeah. So my way and your way won the race.
Oh, that's so cool. I love it.
Plus I was blindfolded.
Yeah, I forgot about that part.
I
I
was
just,
blindfolded
totally
going
glossed over
backwards.
the part that you were blindfolded. So he would just he would give you all the commands, as far as, and you had to, man, how fast were you going?
About 3 miles an hour, I think, maybe 5, if that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Barely
so it's just
anything.
kinda
It wasn't a timed thing.
learning
It
how
wasn't
to,
like a round
right.
robin or a bridge. I didn't have to have the favorite I didn't have to have the fastest time. I just had to complete the course, and he had to have
And
water
have
left.
some water left. Yeah.
Right. I won
Yeah.
4 BF Goodrich tires though, so I didn't do too shabby.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's so cool. So I think we're pretty much getting to, we've got to wrap this up, right? I think you've got
Oh,
somewhere to be,
I
right?
love talking to you. I think
But
this is fun. I'm glad I'm,
no, I
you know.
really enjoy it every time, and we'll definitely do it again. I would love to talk about, yeah, what we said. Let's get on here and talk some more about like the relationships communication. Look, I had some questions on here for you that were in my mind. I didn't get to any of them except for the race car one. That was the only one that,
Well,
that
you
I
can ask
eventually
them.
got around to.
Fire away. We got 5 minutes. What you got?
Oh man, I don't. Well, see, this is involved. This is involved because one of the big things I wanted to know about was the last time you were on the podcast. I didn't get a chance to ask you, but it came up when you were talking about kind of how you got started, and you mentioned that you did an internship with human trafficking survivors.
I
So we're going
did.
to like kind of a heavy place right at the end of the podcast here, but yeah. So I was just curious. I mean, that's kind of like right at the beginning of what you're doing in your career, right? You're like thrown into the deep end. And you
With
know,
the
one of the things I was very
alligators.
curious
Yeah.
about, yeah, and I mean that's an area where it's just it's so close to my heart, and just curious about, you know, getting into that world. What was, you know, just some, we probably only have time for maybe one thing, but what was something that that came out of that you learned from having that experience that maybe, you know, you just weren't aware of, or that, you know, you kind of
Boundaries.
became aware by working with that community? Okay.
I could
Wow.
not be Captain Save a Person. So that was
Wow.
very challenging for me because these are individuals who are very much in a situation that they feel they can't get out of. And so building that person back up, but having my own boundaries and realizing my life is not their life, my life is not their experience.
Mm,
So recognizing and focusing on the skills that I could give them to empower them to move forward in their life and own their story.
wow.
This is what happened to you. This is not who you are.
Come on.
That was a huge um, educational piece that I received
Hmm.
because
That's
people go
beautiful.
through absolutely horrific circumstances, but it
Yeah.
doesn't tell me, that's not who you are. Who are
Mhm.
you? We want to get to that person in the core so that this never happens again.
Wow.
So that was the biggest takeaway for me that I found with working with those individuals. And I call them survivors, not victims, because
Hmm.
they don't like to be called victims.
Yeah.
See, that was quick. We got 2 more minutes. What you got?
No, it's good. Look, I really just, I want to tell you how grateful I am just for you and for your time. You know, people might not get it from this interview because you're so down to earth. But you're just such a rock star. And I mean, what you're doing, like we've talked about several things, but I mean, some of the projects and different things that you are involved in,
Mhm.
it's just, you're doing such groundbreaking stuff, and your heart again is to help people to be free and to stay free and to walk
Well, I
in
know what it
freedom, to walk
feels
in
like to
wholeness.
suffer. So
Yeah,
I myself have had, and I'm sure you want me to tell my story, and maybe we'll do that initially
we
in
will.
the beginning of the next one. But
Yeah,
I
we can
um
start with
I
that.
know what it's like to suffer. I know what it feels like to be helpless. I know what it feels like to be depressed. I
Mm,
know what it feels like to be on a myriad of medications. I know what it feels like to go through the VA and not get the results you're looking for. I'm not saying they're not helpful, but to some people, they feel like it's not enough, right? So for me, I opened a private practice. I figured it out. I have a bunch of veterans and first responders that are licensed counselors under me. We treat civilians, but we've walked the path of those who put on a uniform. So
mm,
we have a
right.
different level, right? And
Yes.
we kind of understand their walk, where you have combat stress for military veterans and active duty, but then you have compound stress for first responders. It's very different and it needs to be handled differently. And there are some clinicians that may be like, I want to work with first responders. Okay, what are you doing to make that happen?
Mm,
Like I said, I talked to a
yeah.
colonel last night, and she's like, they're not walking the walk. They're talking, trying to get into an area because they find it fascinating, not because they'll be helpful. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, that was profound. By
Yeah.
the way, I'm going to connect you to her because she's amazing.
Please, please. That's the other thing is you've been so generous with your time today, and also just in general. And I mean, you've connected me to so many people and given me an opportunity to just kind of get a glimpse into a world that I would otherwise not really have an opportunity. I'm so glad you exist and that people like you are out there just helping people that are struggling, and particularly in these communities that maybe are a little bit harder to reach for someone who doesn't have the experience of having gone through what you've gone through. You
Well,
know what I
trauma
mean?
isn't comparable either. And that
Yeah.
does frustrate me a little bit. It's like, oh, you're an Air Force veteran. Oh, so, my trauma of the death of my mother isn't war. And it's like, you're right.
Right.
But to
Right.
you, it changed your life. It changed your
Right.
trajectory. So it's an important trauma to process, right? Because it affected you negatively. And now you've moved over here, right? You were going down lane A and now you're over here on lane B, So
Mm,
that's the thing. Trauma is never comparable and it should never be compared. And anyway,
mm,
so I have I have
yeah.
a for-profit. I have a counseling business. It's called Semper Modus LLC. So that's the website is
Always motivated.
SEMPERMOTIS LLC. It means always on the move or always motivated because I'm never home. I do everything virtually because I'm always gone and I love it. I love to go bye-bye.
Hmm.
So that's a big part of it. But the other thing is, I have clinicians strategically placed in different states. So those individuals who want to be seen face to face can be seen.
Oh, yeah.
And they all have different certifications, different modalities, different ways that they practice. And they're pretty
Yeah.
good. So, yeah, I'm
Sounds
here to
like how
help.
we're building church right now. We do a lot of stuff online, and then we're planting in areas where we've got people so we can have face-to-face stuff, just extending the community. And I love that.
Well,
Very
I
cool.
appreciate you and thank you for having me on. And I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
the next one. And I
Yeah, we'll
love
do it
all the
again
mustard
soon.
seeds. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do it again soon. Thanks, Dr. Janelle Royster. Appreciate you so much. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time to check out this episode. Appreciate you guys as well. Be blessed, and see you next time.